Sophie loved to paint. Every morning, she walked to the small park near her Paris apartment to set up her easel. One day, as she painted a colorful scene of a bustling Paris street, a man approached her. "Excuse me," he said in English, "your painting is beautiful." Sophie turned and saw a tall man with warm brown eyes. He was holding a notebook. "Thank you," she replied, also in English. "I love painting." The man smiled. "I'm Rohan," he said. "I'm from India. I'm here for a conference." Sophie introduced herself and learned that Rohan was a tech entrepreneur who loved poetry. They started talking about art and words, and even though their English wasn't perfect, they laughed and understood each other. As the sun set, Rohan said, "Can I show you something?" He opened his notebook and shared a poem he had written about a flower blooming in the desert. Sophie's eyes lit up. "It's beautiful," she said. Inspired, she sketched a picture of the poem, a tiny flower surrounded by endless sand. "That's exactly how I imagined it," Rohan exclaimed. They exchanged smiles, feeling a connection they couldn't explain. The next day, Sophie invited Rohan to her favorite cafe. She brought her sketch pad, and Rohan brought his notebook. They spent hours drawing and writing, sharing ideas without worrying about mistakes. "Art and words are the same," Sophie said. "They speak to the heart." Rohan nodded. "Yes, it's like we don't need perfect language. We just need to feel." They decided to create something together, a poem illustrated by Sophie's drawings. It was about two stars trying to find each other in a vast galaxy. "That's how I feel," Rohan said softly. Sophie blushed but smiled, feeling the same way. The next few days flew by as Sophie and Rohan spent more time together. They visited art galleries, walked along the Seine, and exchanged stories about their homes. But sometimes, their conversations hit a wall. Sophie's English wasn't strong, and Rohan's French was non-existent. One afternoon, they sat in the park where they first met. Sophie tried to explain an idea for a painting. "It is like a feeling, but also..." She struggled to find the right words. "Wait," Rohan said. He pulled out his notebook and sketched a small figure standing in a rainstorm, holding an umbrella with a hole in it. Sophie laughed. "Yes, that is exactly it." "See," Rohan said, "we don't need perfect words. We understand." But later that evening, as Sophie lay in bed, she felt a small knot of doubt. Could their connection survive without a common language? She pushed the thought aside, wanting to enjoy the present. The day Rohan has to leave Paris comes too quickly. They stand in front of the train station, the sound of announcements echoing around them. Sophie held a small sketch she had made for Rohan, two hands reaching for each other but separated by a wide river. "I'll miss you," Sophie said, her voice quiet. She didn't know if she could express everything she felt. Rohan looked at the sketch and smiled. "Me too, but this is not the end." They exchanged emails and promised to keep in touch. As the train pulled away, Sophie waved, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. She clutched the poem Rohan had given her, a token of their bond. True to their word, Sophie and Rohan began exchanging letters. Sophie would send her watercolor paintings scanned into emails, often with short notes. "This reminds me of your poem about the moonlight." Rohan responded with his poems and sometimes little drawings. One poem was about a bird trying to find its way back to its nest. Sophie painted a bird flying over mountains and sent it to him. Their emails became a lifeline, something they both looked forward to every day. Sophie's heart raced every time she saw Rohan's name in her inbox. Rohan, too, would smile at his phone, imagining Sophie sitting at her desk, reading his words. But as their connection grew deeper, the challenges became clearer. Sophie's father, a traditional man, noticed her growing distraction. One evening at dinner, he asked, "Who is this boy you keep writing to?" Sophie hesitated. "His name is Rohan. He's from India. He's very kind and talented." Her father frowned. "India? That's so far away, and his life is very different from ours. How can you know him?" Sophie didn't have an answer. She knew her father was worried, but she also felt her feelings for Rohan were real. Meanwhile, Rohan faced his own challenges. His parents had started hinting that it was time for him to settle down. "We have found a nice girl," his mother said one evening. "She's from our community." Rohan tried to explain. I've met someone, but she's not from here. His parents exchanged worried looks. Rohan, marriage is not just about love, it's about family and tradition. Rohan didn't know what to say. For the first time, he felt the weight of the distance between him and Sophie, not just physical, but cultural. One day, Sophie received terrible news. Her father had fallen ill. She spent all her time at the hospital, her paints and emails forgotten. Rohan sent her messages, but she couldn't find the energy to reply. "I hope you're okay," one of his emails said. "I'm here if you want to talk." But Sophie didn't know how to explain her pain in a way Rohan would understand. Days turned into weeks, and the silence grew heavier. Rohan, feeling hurt and confused, thought Sophie had lost interest. "Maybe she's moved on," he told himself, though his heart ached at the thought. Months passed. Sophie's father recovered, but her relationship with Rohan seemed broken. She often stared at her inbox, wanting to write but not knowing how to begin. What if he doesn't care anymore? She thought. Rohan, meanwhile, buried himself in work. He started a new project, a tech app that could turn emotions into art. The idea had come from Sophie, though he didn't admit it to himself at first. One evening, Rohan sat at his desk, staring at the app's prototype. It translated user-submitted words into visual patterns, like abstract paintings. He thought of Sophie's drawings and wondered if she would ever see this. Sophie tried to move on. She painted more than ever, pouring her sadness into her work. Her latest series was about distance. Stars separated by galaxies, hands unable to touch, bridges left unfinished. Her friends noticed her change. "Who are these paintings for?" one asked. "No one," Sophie said, though she knew it wasn't true. Far away, Rohan stared at his app's growing success. It had started as a way to process his emotions, but now it was gaining attention. Would Sophie be proud of this? He wondered. But he didn't reach out, fearing it was too late. Rohan's app was gaining traction. The idea of transforming emotions into art resonated with people. Users could input a phrase like, "I feel lost," or "I am in love," and the app would generate stunning visuals, swirls of colors, shapes, and textures. Rohan presented his work at tech conferences, receiving applause and awards. But every time he looked at the generated art, he thought of Sophie. Her sketches had been the seed of this idea, and he hadn't told her. One night, Rohan stared at a blank email. He wanted to share the app with Sophie, to thank her for inspiring him. But the longer he stared, the harder it became to write. "What if she doesn't care?" he whispered to himself. He closed his laptop, feeling the weight of his doubts. In Paris, Sophie was browsing art blogs late one evening when she saw a headline, "App turns emotions into art, a revolution in creativity." The article described Rohan's app in glowing terms and included a sample image. Sophie gasped. The image was familiar, patterns and colors that reminded her of their time together. Her chest tightened as she read more about the app and its creator, Rohan Kumar. "He did this," she whispered. She felt a mix of pride and longing. She remembered how they had connected through art, how they had understood each other without needing perfect words. That night, she downloaded the app and tested it. She typed, "I miss you," and watched as the app created a painting of soft blues and golds, resembling two hands almost touching. Sophie stared at the screen, tears filling her eyes. She knew she had to reach out. The next morning, Sophie opened her email and wrote to Rohan. "Dear Rohan, I saw your app. It's beautiful, like your poems. It reminds me of us. I hope you're well. I miss our talks. Do you think we can try again?" She hesitated before hitting send, her heart racing. What if he didn't reply? What if he had moved on? Days passed without an answer. Sophie checked her inbox constantly, growing more anxious. Just as she was about to give up, an email appeared from Rohan. "Sophie, I can't believe you wrote to me. I've thought about you every day. The app, yes, it's us. You inspired it. Can we talk? I've missed you." Sophie smiled through her tears, relief washing over her. She replied quickly, and soon they were exchanging messages as if no time had passed. A few weeks later, Rohan flew to Paris. When Sophie saw him at the airport, her heart raced. He looked the same, his warm eyes, his kind smile, but there was something deeper now, a shared history that had shaped them both. "Hi," he said softly, stepping closer. "Hi," Sophie whispered, and then they hugged, the months of silence melting away. They spent the next few days exploring the city, revisiting the places they had once loved. Rohan showed Sophie how his app worked, and she marveled at the way it translated feelings into visual beauty. "This is us," she said, touching the screen. "This is what we created." "No," Rohan said, taking her hand. "This is what you inspired." As they talked, Sophie and Rohan opened up about their struggles. Sophie shared how her father's illness had consumed her and how she had felt unable to reach out. "I thought you didn't want to talk to me anymore," Rohan admitted. "I thought I'd lost you." Sophie shook her head. "I was scared, but I never stopped thinking about you." They promised to communicate better, no matter the challenges. Slowly, they began to heal the wounds caused by distance and misunderstandings. One evening, as they sat by the Seine, Sophie had an idea. "What if we worked on something together? Your app is amazing, but it could have more. What if it also included art, like real sketches and paintings?" Rohan's eyes lit up. "You mean, combine the app with your art?" "Yes," Sophie said excitedly. "People could express themselves through your technology and my drawings. It could be a way for them to feel seen." Rohan smiled. "Let's do it." They began brainstorming, sketching ideas on napkins and coding late into the night. Their combined talents created something neither could have done alone. As Sophie and Rohan worked on their project, their connection deepened. They felt unstoppable, until it was time to tell their families. One evening, Sophie sat her father down. "Papa, I want you to meet someone important to me. His name is Rohan." Her father frowned. "The man from India? Sophie, his life is so different from ours. Have you thought about what this means?" "I have," Sophie said firmly. "He inspires me, Papa. Together, we're creating something beautiful." Meanwhile, in India, Rohan spoke with his parents. "Sophie is not just someone I love. She's someone who makes me better. I want you to meet her." His mother shook her head. "Rohan, this is not how things are done. She doesn't understand our traditions." "I want her to," Rohan said. "Please give her a chance." Both families agreed reluctantly, but the tension lingered. Sophie and Rohan knew their love had to prove itself to everyone around them. Their app was ready. Named Heartlines, it allowed users to express emotions through both abstract digital art and real sketches provided by Sophie. They organized a launch event in Paris, inviting journalists, artists, and tech enthusiasts. Sophie was nervous as she stood by Rohan. "What if no one likes it?" "They will," Rohan said, squeezing her hand, "because it's honest." As people tested the app, the room buzzed with excitement. A woman typed, "I feel lost," and Sophie's sketch of a lighthouse appeared on the screen. Another user typed, "I'm in love," and Rohan's app created swirling reds and pinks. By the end of the night, Heartlines was trending online. People called it a bridge between emotions and creativity. While the world celebrated their app, Sophie and Rohan struggled privately. Sophie began to feel out of place in Rohan's tech-driven world, surrounded by engineers and coders. "I'm just an artist," she told him one evening. "I don't belong here." Rohan looked hurt. "You're not just anything, Sophie. This app wouldn't exist without you." At the same time, Rohan felt torn by his family's disapproval. His mother had stopped speaking to him since the launch. "Why can't they see that Sophie makes me happy?" he confided to her one night. Sophie hugged him. "We'll figure it out, together." But the pressure was mounting. Sophie began to doubt if their relationship could last. She loved Rohan, but their worlds felt so far apart. One afternoon, while painting, she imagined herself in Rohan's home in India. Would she fit in? Would she understand the traditions and expectations? Her fears spilled onto the canvas. She painted a small bird perched on the edge of a vast ocean, unsure whether to fly across. When Rohan saw the painting, he asked, "Is this how you feel?" Sophie nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm scared, Rohan. What if I'm not enough for you, for your family?" Rohan took her hands. "You're more than enough, but we'll face this fear together." In India, Rohan's parents continued to push him to end the relationship. "You're forgetting who you are," his father said. Family and tradition are everything. Rohan felt torn. He loved his parents and respected their values, but he couldn't imagine life without Sophie. Why can't love be part of our traditions? He asked one evening, his voice shaking with frustration. His parents didn't have an answer, but Rohan knew he had to make a choice soon. One day, a journalist wrote a negative article about Heartlines, accusing it of being too simplistic. Sophie, already feeling insecure, took it personally. "Maybe they're right," she told Rohan. "Maybe I'm holding you back." Rohan was frustrated. "Why do you keep doubting yourself? You're amazing, Sophie. You need to believe that." Their argument escalated, and for the first time, they spent a day apart without speaking. Sophie felt lost without Rohan's steady support, and Rohan felt the weight of their challenges more than ever. That evening, Sophie sent Rohan a message through Heartlines. She typed, "I'm sorry, I'm scared, but I love you." The app created a simple image, two hands clasped tightly, surrounded by a glowing light. Rohan replied immediately, "I love you too. Let's not give up." Determined to understand Rohan's world, Sophie traveled to India. She was nervous as she stepped off the plane, but Rohan's smile calmed her fears. "Welcome to my home," he said. Over the next few days, Sophie met Rohan's family. His mother was polite but distant, and his father asked pointed questions about her future plans. Despite this, Sophie felt a deep connection to the vibrant culture around her. One evening, she surprised Rohan's parents by cooking a simple Indian dish she had learned from a cookbook. "This is my way of showing respect," she said shyly. Rohan's mother softened, and for the first time, Sophie felt a glimmer of hope. Sophie's efforts to embrace Rohan's culture began to pay off. Rohan's parents noticed her sincerity, especially his mother. One afternoon, while sitting in the courtyard, Sophie asked her, "Can you teach me how to prepare a traditional dish?" Rohan's mother hesitated, then nodded. Together, they cooked lentils and bread, exchanging small smiles. "You're trying," his mother said quietly. "That means something." Sophie beamed, encouraged by the small breakthrough. Later, Rohan whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Still, not everyone was convinced. Rohan's father remained skeptical. "Love is not enough," he told Rohan one evening. "Life is about balance, tradition, and responsibility." Rohan replied, "Sophie and I can build a life that honors both our worlds. I hope one day you'll see that." Rohan decided to make a bold move. At a community gathering, he stood up to speak. "Many of you know Sophie," he said. "She's not just my partner. She's part of my life, and she respects our traditions." Sophie stood beside him, her heart pounding. "I've fallen in love with Rohan's world," she said. "I hope you'll give me the chance to prove myself." The crowd murmured, but many smiled, moved by their courage. Rohan's father said nothing, but his mother placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. That night, Sophie and Rohan sat under the stars. "We did it," Sophie whispered. "Maybe not perfectly, but we tried." "And we'll keep trying," Rohan said, holding her hand. Back in Paris, Sophie and Rohan focused on growing Heartlines. Inspired by their journey, they added a feature to the app. Users could now write short cultural stories, which the app would transform into artistic visuals. The goal was to foster understanding between different cultures. The update was a hit. Stories from all over the world poured in, tales of family traditions, lost loves, and dreams of unity. Sophie and Rohan felt a deep pride in how their creation was bringing people together. One story, submitted by a user from Japan, described a cherry blossom tree as a symbol of fleeting beauty. The app turned it into a stunning visual, and it became one of the platform's most shared pieces. "This is what we wanted," Sophie said, "to create something that connects people." Rohan smiled, "Just like us." As Heartlines gained global attention, a rival company emerged, claiming they had created a similar app. The rival app used Heartlines' concept, but lacked its artistic depth. Despite this, it began to attract users with aggressive marketing. "This is unfair," Sophie said, pacing their studio. "They're stealing our idea." "We'll fight back," Rohan said calmly. "Not with anger, but with creativity. Let's show the world why we're different." They hosted workshops, inviting artists and writers to share their work through Heartlines. These events drew attention, and soon the world saw the app for what it truly was, a heartfelt collaboration between cultures. The rival company eventually faded, unable to compete with the authenticity of Sophie and Rohan's vision. The challenge brought Sophie and Rohan closer. They realized their strength lay in their unity, both as creators and as partners. One evening, as they reviewed submissions for the app, Sophie said, "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" "All the time," Rohan replied, "and it's only the beginning." But just as they started to relax, Rohan received a message from his father. "Come home," it read. "We need to talk." Rohan looked at Sophie. "I think this is it. The moment we prove to my family that we're serious." Sophie nodded, determined. "Let's go together." Before leaving for India, Heartlines received an unexpected honor, an international award for innovation in art and technology. Sophie and Rohan were invited to London to accept the prize. Standing on stage, Sophie said, "This app is more than a tool. It's a way to share stories and emotions across cultures. It's proof that differences can bring us closer." The audience erupted in applause. Rohan added, "And it all started with two people who believed art and technology could speak the same language." Their families watched the broadcast. In India, Rohan's mother smiled. "He's found someone special," she admitted to her husband. Back in India, Sophie and Rohan sat with his parents. Rohan spoke earnestly. "Sophie is not here to change our traditions. She wants to learn them and honor them. I want you to see her as I do." Sophie added, "I love Rohan, and I love the world he comes from. I hope you'll give me a place in it." After a long silence, Rohan's father finally said, "If you both are willing to work this hard for each other, then maybe you've earned our blessing." That evening, Rohan took Sophie to the garden where they had first spoken with his parents. Kneeling on one knee, he said, "Sophie, you've been my inspiration and my partner. Will you marry me?" Tears streaming down her face, Sophie whispered, "Yes." Sophie and Rohan's wedding was a blend of their cultures. They wore traditional Indian attire, but incorporated French elements like lavender bouquets. Guests from all over the world attended, including artists, writers, and coders who had been inspired by Heartlines. As they exchanged vows, Rohan said, "Love isn't just about words or traditions. It's about creating something bigger than ourselves." Sophie added, "And finding beauty in our differences." Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was real, a testament to the power of love, creativity, and determination. Together, they continued to build a life that bridged the gap between worlds, proving that the language of the heart truly knows no boundaries.